Okay, I'm pressing go live now.
Angela, you're on mute.
Okay, start again. It is my pleasure to introduce this panel discussion this afternoon on building an effective AML ecosystem. My name is Angela Foyle. I am the chair of the Accountancy Europe AML Working Party, and I'm Director of Global Economic Crime Risk Management at BDO, an accounting firm. I also sit on the United Kingdom's Public-Private Steering Group for Economic Crime, which is overseeing a work together across sector on the economic crime plan. If you haven't yet had an opportunity to read the Accountancy Europe paper on building an effective AML ecosystem, then I would definitely recommend that you do so. For many years, the system has focused very much on a compliance-based approach to AML prevention. Although this is a critical factor in order to assure effective gatekeeping, there are suggestions in this paper how we can enhance this and how we can focus on bringing from compliance alone to harnessing the knowledge and skills that all parts of the AML system have in the fight against economic crime. Without further ado, I will ask my fellow panelists to introduce themselves and then ask Mr. Stephen Ryan of the European Commission to make his open remarks. So if I start with you, Mr. Ryan, to introduce yourself and then move on to the other speakers.
Yes, thank you very much, Angela, for the introduction. My name's Steve Ryan, and I'm the Deputy Head of the Financial Crime Unit in DG FISMA of the European Commission.
And if I could move on then to you, Ilze.
Yeah, good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, my panelists, my colleagues panelists. My name is Ilze Znotina. I'm the head of FIU Latvia. I'm also head of delegation to Moneyval and FATF of Latvia. And I'm very happy to be invited to speak in this forum. Thank you.
And Roger?
Yeah, thank you, Angela. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roger Kaiser. I'm Senior Policy Advisor at the European Banking Federation, which is the voice of European banks. And I'm there in charge of tax issues, anti-money laundering, financial crime, financial sanction, and also internal audit.
And if we pass back to Steve now to start his presentation on behalf of the European Commission.
Thank you very much. And also thanks for giving me the opportunity to give a brief presentation on where the Commission stands in this area. Now, you no doubt remember slightly more than a year ago in May of last year, the Commission adopted an action plan for anti-money laundering with 6 pillars, 3 of which require legislative follow-up and 3 of which don't. We are very, very close now to being able to announce publicly our legislative package following up on the legislative action points of our action plan. We were hoping to be already out there publicly with the details before today. There has been a very small degree of slippage to July, which is really due to technical factors. Don't forget that we have to translate everything into all the official EU languages, etc., etc. So there has been a little bit of timetable slippage, which unfortunately means that I'm not in a position today to present to you the details of what will be in our legislative package. But in any case, the details would require much longer than 10 minutes anyway. And I can reveal some broad lines about what is going to be in our proposal, and I hope that will be sufficient to feed the debate today. Now, you should bear in mind in what I say today that everything is, of course, subject to political confirmation until the very last moment. Our plans are very advanced. Our legislation is written, but until the final moment of adoption, you cannot take it as being written in stone. That's just a standard proviso. So at the heart of our plans, we have more harmonized rules, which we call a single rule book, and we have institutional change with a new EU-level AML authority. Those are the two key pillars of our proposal, and I will say a word about each of them in turn. So firstly, regarding the rules and the rule book. Now, until now, the application of AML rules has, in our view, suffered from a lack of sufficient detail at union level, opening up the way to divergent transpositions at national level. This doesn't mean that we necessarily have infringements and incorrect transposition, but there are always there's always the possibility of divergence in detail while conforming to the broad EU legislation. Now, this has resulted in weak links across the internal market. We cannot deny that, and some of these weaknesses were actually discussed in a package of publications in 2019 that we did, including the famous post-mortem report. So we want this this divergence and these weak links to come to an end. The rules for the private sector entities to follow, the obliged entities, will be laid down in a directly applicable regulation, no longer subject to national transposition. Now, it will not be a totally harmonized system because that would not be compatible with the risk-based approach. There has to be some margin still for member states to adopt their own additional rules if that's justified. But also deciding how to structure their system, including the functioning of national supervision and financial intelligence units and cooperation between them. An obvious example of that is whether a member state wishes to make use of self-regulatory bodies in certain sectors, for example. However, more is needed. A greater degree of convergence is needed, and we will address shortcomings. Now, transferring rulemaking to EU level, it cannot result in ignoring risks that confront some particular parts of our internal market, but we need to make sure that where risks are relevant at the union level, we act at union level. Now, one thing which we will do in the proposal is to review the list of obliged entities, the list of sectors which are covered. Now, I can't go through the entire set of changes that we will make, but one very important change we will make is to align our legislation with the latest FATF standards as regards virtual asset service providers. At the moment, only certain types are covered as obliged entities. We will make sure that all of them are covered as obliged entities. And we will also make sure that transfers of virtual assets, including cryptocurrencies, are traceable. This will be done by amending the existing transfer of funds regulation so that full details of the sender and the beneficiary must accompany crypto transfers, not just transfers of traditional funds. Now, there will probably be some other additions and possibly also deletions from the list of obliged entities, but I will just leave it at that for the moment regarding the obliged entities. Now, we also plan to deepen the level of detail in some areas which are already in our legislation, such as customer due diligence, CDD, and beneficial ownership. In this context, a very important part of the future rulebook will be legally binding technical standards to be developed by the future AML authority, which I will come to in a moment, which will add much more granularity to the high-level rules in the regulation and bring about a greater degree of harmonization. And CDD is exactly one area where we think technical standards can be very helpful, and there will be others. There are also some risks that we will tackle which have not yet been fully mitigated. Now, bearer instruments generally are highly exposed to criminal misuse due to their anonymity. And of course, the classic bearer instrument is cash. And most proceeds of criminal activity are, of course, made in cash. The cash is then invested in real estate or high value goods to disguise its illegal origin. And it is not rare in certain places for real estate to be bought with cash at the moment. Now, these risks are already reflected in our current rules, which make operators trading in goods subject to AML rules when receiving or making payments worth 10,000 euros or more. But we have to recognize that this has not worked so well. So we are very seriously looking into imposing an EU level upper limit for cash purchases of 10,000 euros, while of course respecting that a number of member states have already decided to impose lower ceilings domestically. Now, such a limit is high enough not to put in question the euro as legal tender, nor to affect financial inclusion. But at the same time, it is low enough to make it more difficult for criminals to launder large sums of cash by making purchases of real estate, cars, diamonds, etc. in cash. So that's a very important thing that we will propose. Now, after the rulebook, the second pillar of our reform is the new AML authority. It will have a number of different roles. Now, for a very limited number of obliged entities in the financial sector, it will be a direct supervisor. Those entities will be selected based on a kind of a matrix, which is not yet fully worked out, but they will be in the highest risk category and essentially cross-border in nature. But it will not replace national supervisors for the vast majority of obliged entities. The obliged entities outside the financial sector will be strictly excluded from direct supervision, and the majority in the financial sector will also remain supervised by national supervisors. For those ones which remain under national supervision, the new authority will be a coordinator, an overseer of national supervisors, including, of course, the non-financial sector ones also. But I think given the diversity and specificity of those sectors, it will have I think it's fair to say, a lighter touch in coordinating the national supervisors than for the financial sector. The authority will also be a coordinator and a support mechanism for financial intelligence units, facilitating their cooperation, communication, and joint analyses, for example. It will have a regulatory role, which I already mentioned, preparing the technical standards, and it will also provide policy advice to the Commission, for example, on risks originating in third countries. So it will combine under one roof in our plan both supervisory tasks and FIU-related tasks. We believe that this is likely to generate synergies, which will result in a better understanding of the risks facing the Union, whether internal or from the outside. It will create a mechanism where the Union is well aware of the risks facing it, and measures are taken at all levels, whether by competent authorities or obliged entities to manage those risks. The roles of the new authority as direct supervisor and indirect supervisor should be complementary. While only the riskiest cross-border financial institutions would be directly supervised by the authority, relieving national supervisors of a significant burden, the experience in direct supervision will enable the new authority to better coordinate national supervisors regarding the vast majority of obliged entities, both financial and non-financial. The direct supervision should be carried out via joint supervisory teams with national supervisors, which is based on the system already used by the single supervisory mechanism for prudential supervision in the banking sector. So this will, again, help to bring the authority and national supervisors closer together. Now, as regards the funding of the new authority, I have to say that it will, to a certain degree, be funded from fees by obliged entities to avoid being an excessive burden on the public, on the taxpayer of the EU. But I can say that the fees will be reasonable and bearable, and they will only fall on certain financial sector entities. Now, regarding timing, our current planning is for the authority to get off the ground in 2024, to reach full staffing at the end of 2025, and to start carrying out direct supervision for the first time in 2026. So that's a very, very brief run through of what's coming up very soon, within a matter of weeks, in our legislative package. Just let me very briefly mention a couple of things that are on our agenda at the moment outside the legislative package. One important thing we're working on following up the action plan of last year is the subject of information exchange and public-private partnerships. In this area, we plan to launch a consultation very, very soon with a view to publishing guidance by the end of this year. So please do watch out for that public consultation. Another thing we're working on at the moment is the realization of the cross-border interconnection between national registers of beneficial ownership. We hope that will be operational later this year. That's based on the existing legal framework. And also another thing that we will publish later this year is the next edition of the biennial supranational risk assessment. So the last one was 2019. It's due again this year. And of course, we continue on a permanent basis our deep involvement in the Financial Action Task Force. So this is a very, very active time in the AML field. I genuinely believe that the work that we are doing right now will lay solid foundations for a very robust EU framework for AML CFT, which will stand the test of time. And I noticed I ran over a couple of minutes, but I'm winding up there. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. And I will just remind everybody in the audience that there is the capacity to ask questions via Slido, and I think the link should be on a home screen that was provided to you. Yes, it's just been shown currently. So if you would like to use that, please do. And with that, I will now open the general question. The questions to general discussion. So I'm going to start with you, Roger, and ask you, having heard what you've heard, do you think this will make the difference that we need and actually allow the EU stand a better chance against the criminals?
Well, I think it's very important what we are what we expect for July. For me, it's really should be a turning point. So a major step in the implementation of the action plan. And before reacting, let me take a step back to March 2020 and refer to the EBF AML blueprint. 2 months before the publication of the Commission action plan, we published this blueprint highlighting 4 areas of inefficiencies, which were the regulatory fragmentation, tick-the-box approach, supervisory fragmentation, and the lack of FIU support and coordination mechanism. Then the lack of cooperation and the bias to information sharing, and also the suboptimal use of tools and technologies. And when 2 months later the Commission adopted its action plan, we welcomed it very much. It was very much in line with our analysis, and so I think we are still going in the right direction. It's very important that we get it right. Again, it's a very important step, but well, I'm still looking forward to see the full package on which we will conduct as EBF a detailed gap analysis. Allow me perhaps to anticipate it and make some remarks related to 3 major areas of concern. The first one is, of course, the AML authority, where I think the major question is, what will this new authority actually do? I mean, what will be the added value? If it's just to add a new layer of reporting, it will not do the deal. So what we expect as what we hope as financial industry, banking industry, is that this new authority facilitates intelligence sharing, and so indeed the FIU support mechanism is very important for us. Now the devil is in the details, and again we look forward to see the whole package and understand whether the competencies, the scope are clearly defined, are well calibrated. It's very important to avoid any possible overlaps, duplications. The structure and governance, very important also, because we need to have a balance between the objective of centralization and at the same time to keep consistency with national supervision. And now the big question is, in terms of scope of direct supervision, why is the non-financial sector outside? That's a bit disappointing. What will be the selection criteria for the selected entities? It's really a key question. We very much hope that that will be based on a risk-based approach. So follow a risk-based approach. If the selection is based on the size of entities, we think it's not sufficient, neither appropriate. And last remark about the AML authority, it's key that it receives the appropriate resources in terms of staffing and funding. But of course, we considered that duplication of banking levies should be avoided.
So the cost is going to be quite important in that respect.
Exactly.
And how it's borne. I mean, I think from our perspective, we would also have I'm interested to say that you're slightly disappointed that the direct supervision is only for the financial sector. And I suppose there is a question of, did you have other sectors in mind where you think that direct supervision might be appropriate? Which is one question. The second, I think, is more a plea from those of us who are not in the financial sector, that actually what we don't lose is that specialist knowledge of those other sectors, which is required in having effective supervision from them. So it would just be interesting which sectors you think you might, you would have added in for direct supervision.
Well, for me, first, I haven't yet seen any details of what will be proposed. I think all the financial sector, if there is a contribution, all the financial sector should be asked to contribute. That's clear. So including cryptocurrencies, cryptocurrency service providers, insurance companies, money value transfer services, and why not all designated non-financial businesses and professionals?
Well, we'll probably have to wait to see, because it may well be, as in other countries, that is actually what's going to happen. So
exactly. Okay. I'm just anticipating the possible controversial discussions.
Yeah, I think there will be some controversial discussions, definitely. Actually, the point that you make actually brings me to a question that I think one of our audience has asked, which I think probably will go back to Steve Ryan, which is, a question about the general insurance sector and whether there's any possibility, and I'm not sure you're going to be able to comment about this now, but whether there's any possibility that the sector will be excluded from AML obligations all over Europe. As I say, I don't suspect you'll be able to comment precisely, but you might actually have some thoughts on mindset around that.
If general insurance means non-life insurance, then it's already outside the scope. The only life insurance is currently within the scope of the AML legislation as an obliged entity. So non-life insurance is currently not covered. There is a debate about whether it should be covered. I can't say definitively what we will do, but I can point to the fact that the advice that we got from the European Banking Authority in the run-up to preparing our legislation did not recommend to include the non-life insurance sector. So I think I can just leave it at that for now.
That's helpful. I suspect it must be in relation to a particular jurisdiction that somebody had the question. So thank you. I'm going to come to Ilze a little bit now. So having heard what Steve has said and also what Roger has said, from your perspective, how will the coordination support mechanism for FIUs, which is one of the Commission's key objectives and which we've mentioned very briefly, how might that affect your work and make it more, do you think it will make it more effective, easier to do, or do you already have things in place?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And I was listening with interest, and I was really expecting and hoping to get more information about the new EU action plan, which will be in force very soon. However, to answer your question, I think it is very important that it is acknowledged that there are issues with FIUs, of course, and sharing intelligence and sharing information as such. However, I would say that is, if I may say so, the solving of this issue has not started from the right end, if I may say so. What I have seen from my experience, and I come from like my background is quite colorful, if I may say so. For 20 years, I was working as attorney, as dispute lawyer, and I was also working as a consultant, being a partner with Deloitte. So having that knowledge of how the international networks of accountants and auditors work, and having consulting also governments for AML matters. Right now, for 3 years, I'm leading Latvian FIU, and I think that our FIU can be presented as example to other FIUs, because we truly believe ourselves to be lead central authority of our country, of our AML system. And we know that there is a particular duties on us to share as much information as possible, to serve some kind of glue for connecting private and public sector, and to really to improve the awareness and provide training to private and public sector representatives. However, what I have seen from my practice, being also a FATF assessor, there is a huge room for improvement of resourcing of FIUs, of allowing them to really to properly manage what they receive from private sector as STRs or SARs, and on their ability to disseminate properly that information that they believe should be investigated by law enforcement. And this comes to the issue that I do not agree to the fact that there was some report of SEPS quite recently published, which basically announced that FIUs are the bottleneck of whole AML system in Europe. And right now, if you allow me, I would be very happy if I could kind of like in brief describe what I see how Europe should approach issue of being some of not so effective in building really like a good system for combating money laundering issues. And I think that is very important that we are not concentrating only on preventive side of money laundering, and that we are not doing only those things that basically very many recently have blamed ineffectiveness of AML system for being very expensive, but not getting to the result. So from that perspective, I think that what I have not seen from European Commission or any other body that would be responsible for this issue is proper assessment of EU-wide money laundering, TF, BF risks. And moreover, I haven't seen any definition of our risk appetite. What kind of risks we are willing to take, what are the tolerance for those risks, and how we will deal with the fact that post-COVID era will involve very many activities where the countries within Europe, not only globally, will fight for all investments that potentially could come to them. And then will be the question about the controls that we are having in place to really to understand how to control those investments, whether we know what kind of investments are there and what we want to untake on us in order to really to properly manage risks. Then another thing, what I think is I'm congratulate European Commission for acknowledging that there should be some more collaboration mechanisms. And this is something that Latvia has tried to implement. And I think that we are very effectively doing that. We are having really true domestic and international collaboration mechanisms in place right now already for several years. And of course, I need to admit that it was done due to the fact that Moneyval announced Latvia, Moneyval, which is regional FATF style body, announced in 2018 that Latvia does not have effective AML system in place, and we've done a lot in order to improve that. We have public-private partnership, which is a mechanism that is coordinated by FIU, where we have not only some strategic level meetings where we can discuss one or another very high level issue of our anti-financial crime system, but we also are meeting on regular basis 2, 3, 4 times per week in order to get to the operational results. And this really brings us to the fact that, for example, FIU's ability to freeze funds, potentially tainted funds, has increased from, if in 2017 we have frozen something around 40 millions, then right now, last year, 423 millions frozen funds. And approximately 90% of all SDRs index analyzed and feedback provided to the reporting entities, which is also very important. Then I think it is very important, and this is somehow already described by the EU plan, by EC plan, is that there will be some lead central authority, EU-wide authority. However, I believe that there should be clear acknowledgement of the fact that every single jurisdiction needs to have such. We need to have one single point in jurisdiction as well, not only on EU level. In Latvia,
so it's effectively a bit like the supervision, where you have almost like a hub and spoke. You need to have things, things. Because I think actually the paper, the Accountancy Europe paper, is very, very much looking, I think, at some of the points you've raised, which is that compliance can't on its own, i.e. gatekeeping can't on its own actually bring the fight to the criminals. What that's doing is trying to keep them from getting in after they've done it, whereas actually some of the things you're talking about with the public-private partnerships are actually making the difference. I mean, I think from what you're saying, you went from 40 to 400 million, which is a tenfold increase, which is really, really quite something. I mean, if we look at this, and I'll bring other people, please do comment, so Steve and Roger as well. If we look at this, and I also am familiar with some of the UK perspective, what are the key factors that people think are important for public-private partnerships? I mean, my own perspective is that I think it does need to go wider than just the pure financial services sector, although I think that the level and type of contributions may differ depending on the sector, just simply because of the data that goes through. And I think the other thing is actually having some form, I mean, it requires trust, but it also requires some sort of feedback loop. So when people put information into the system, they can see how it's being used. The other question I'd ask for everybody is, are there blockages to this? And I think one of the concerns we raised in our paper was, for example, GDPR. While that is hugely important and data privacy is obviously a key matter of concern, does that prevent people from sharing information either between public and private partners, or between private partners, or between public sector bodies? And if it does, how that might, how things might be changed. And I don't know who would like to start with that.
I can possibly say a brief word. Maybe there are many points to react to. I think maybe I'll just react to two points for now. The first is on GDPR. Now, of course, our upcoming package of legislative proposals is not about GDPR, and GDPR is the responsibility of a different part of the Commission. But what I can say is that our guidance document, which is coming up before the end of this year on public-private partnerships, will go quite deeply into the subject of data protection and how we can square the circle of promoting good information exchange while respecting the data protection rules. So we're still working on that one, and that's one thing that our upcoming consultation is going to be about. And the only other point I would make at this point in time is about FIUs being really deluged with excessively high numbers of suspicious transactions, suspicious activity reports, which are perhaps submitted rather defensively by obliged entities. And if we can make the STRs, SARs less numerous but more targeted, then we can go a long way towards unblocking some of the blockages, because quite simply FIUs don't have the resources to deal with thousands and thousands and thousands of STRs, SARs, but we do envisage the new authority as playing an important role here in getting into a more virtuous circle. I think the virtuous circle involves much better feedback in general from FIUs to the obliged entities, and establishing a more two-way communicative relationship between the FIUs and the obliged entities. I mean, that's very easy to say for me sitting here, of course, but I think that's one of the key things that we will expect the new authority to work towards. And that also answers a little bit a point made by Roger earlier on about what exactly will the new authority do. That's just one little example where we hope it can turn what is perhaps a negative cycle into a more virtuous cycle. So I'll just stop there for now. There are many other points, but I would just make those 2 points for now. Thanks.
Thank you. I think Ilze, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, indeed. I just wanted to say that on public-private collaboration, if I may answer this a bit later, but on the feedback provision, it is absolutely important that FIUs are collaborating very effectively with the private sector, as well as they are having feedback from law enforcement that prevents law enforcement in combating crime. And I think this is there I come to the point, which is, to my understanding, the most important one, but has not been touched upon by European Commission, how much there is a combating ability for our law enforcement, prosecutors, let's say also state revenue services, and understanding of judiciary, what is financial crime. There's a huge knowledge in a financial sector, and sometimes also in non-financial sector, or what is financial crime, money laundering, TF, sanction evasion. However, when it comes to the law enforcement side, there is we are lagging behind, hugely lagging behind. So the question again comes to the end, how come we can get to the result where financial institutions are not submitting defensive SARs or STRs if they know that supervisor will come to them, will sanction them, and that will impact their reputational issues, their, I don't know, their budgets, their growth. On other hand, there are serious facilitators, professional money launderers, international networks of TCSPs, I don't know, lawyers, sometimes also, unfortunately, accountants or tax consultants, who have not seen themselves in a position that they can be caught, brought to justice, and that illicit proceeds that they facilitate to be laundered will be confiscated. And this is too serious not to speak about that. Thank you.
No, and I accept that. Roger, I'm going to come to you, and then I'd like to move this topic to some of the questions that have come in, because we've had quite a few. So Roger, I'll just, if I pass over to you for some comments, and I'll come back to the point on accountants and other facilitators afterwards. Roger. You're on mute, I'm afraid. Oh, you're fine now.
Yeah. Well, I can only, I fully agree with Ilze. I think there is a massive flow of STRs, suspicious transaction activities reports, from FIs to FIUs, and a massive number of false positives, and so it's. I think the information that FIUs are facing is like a haystack, and they have to find a needle in the haystack, and we absolutely need to reduce this haystack, and there are two solutions for that. First, indeed, the public-private partnerships, the PPPs, and second, the exploitation, development of new technologies and new tools. And well, so on the PPPs.
Actually, that brings us to one of the questions that being asked. So when you come to your second point, you might want to just think about it, which was one of the questions that I was going to come on to, is what extent existing technology tools are useful at the moment and where are their gaps. So you might just consider that when you come to your second point as well.
Okay, so on the PPPs, I think it's absolutely a tool that we have to exploit, that we have to use to exchange aggregated data, also operational data, so to identify develop new typologies. And also, but I think it's for the future, to exchange personal information. But there, indeed, there are legal problems. That's the first step. We need the legal grounds to do that, particularly in relation to the GDPR. I would like, because I know that we are under time pressure, I would like to insist on also the international dimension, the cross-border dimension, and to refer to Europol's financial intelligence public-private partnership, the FIP, which is developing very fast, and I think efficiently now. They are. It's a step-by-step process, but they deserve full support because that's one of the tools that we have to improve the efficiency of the framework. Yeah, on the technical tools, I would say, if I can be a bit negative about the forthcoming package, that for me it's a gap in the package. There is very little about new technologies, and I think that's the way forward. We can exploit as financial institution artificial intelligence, machine learning tools, it's extremely helpful to sort through the huge amount of alerts, so this haystack, and to select the most critical one. It's also extremely useful to use such tools to identify unusual patterns. And then you have the shared utilities, which can be KYC utilities, so also creating and exploiting synergies with other banks, other financial institutions, and also transaction monitoring. Again, the big issue here is the legal problem, the legal aspect. So with GDPR, and there is a number of questions that need to be clarified. How should we interpret the GDPR requirements in the field of AML? How can we clarify some of the requirements, data minimization, some of the requirements like tipping off, etc. So all these questions must be clarified. And the problem, well, I know that the EBPB has just produced some comments. They still have a very strict and very strict approach to AML, and I think we have to discuss with them, and we have to make them better understand the importance and the challenges of the fight against financial crime.
Yes, which I think filters into something that Ilze also said about actually making sure that people understand what it is that economic crime is. It's interesting you talk about technology, because I think there is also the question that, I mean, obviously within the financial institutions, they usually have huge amounts of data against which technological tools and artificial intelligence are much more easily used, which can be more challenging in the more non-financial sectors. But I know, and it's covered briefly in the Accountancy Europe paper, that there are some of the tools that you mentioned, such as the KYC utilities and other ones, are things that may be possible to use in non-financial sectors. It's something that should be being considered. And I think the other thing that could be is certainly in certain accounting work to look at tools to use across data that comes in to see whether there are outliers or odd things, which is already happening with some of those automated bookkeeping and other accounting systems. So I think there is some movement there, but I think my understanding at least is the banks are way ahead. Now I see that Steve has his hand up, so I'm going to pass back to him.
Thank you. Very, very briefly on technology, a couple of points. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily the role of legislation to mandate the use of certain technologies. I know that there's a lot of talk in the FIU community about the potential of artificial intelligence for analyzing the reports which are received, and I know the new authority will try to follow up on that, maybe to develop some central tools for using artificial intelligence. Then also with regard to KYC, I think that you will find in our package some language which can clarify the circumstances for outsourcing of CDD by the obliged entities, but while always making it clear that the responsibility and the legal responsibility is not delegated. The legal responsibility remains with the obliged entity itself. And then on the use of technology by criminals, I mean, I think some of the recent activities in the news by the U.S. Department of Justice and others by finding and reclaiming Bitcoin, which was illegal ransom payments, shows that cryptocurrency and virtual assets can be traceable. And one of the things that we will do in our package is to make sure that there is no longer any possibility of anonymous use of crypto assets, for example, by prohibiting anonymous crypto wallets. So I think that, and also, as I said in my presentation, to ensure full traceability of crypto transfers. So there are some things that we can do there. I mean, I'm always open to ideas about what more we can do, but there are some things there on the technology side. Thanks.
It's very interesting that you mentioned the cryptos in particular, because one of the questions that came in, and you've almost pre-answered it, was with the importance of cash decreasing and cryptos increasing and being commonly used by criminals, what your thoughts are. And I think you've given those. And I know that Ilze had her hand up, so she may want to cover that point along with what she was going to comment on anyway.
Yeah, thank you. I just raised my hand when I noticed that Stephen is mentioning that there is no possibilities, or it would not be good to facilitate some kind of special IT tools to use for enforcement on enforcement side or any other authorities that would be using them. However, what I would like to raise the attention of European Commission, as well as maybe those who are listening right now to or seeing this conversation here, is that on the other hand, European Commission is quite actively facilitating something that is on fintech side, or maybe some different use of financial channels. What I mean by this is Payment Service Directive, which is something that worries us, FIUs, also some supervisors. I think very many financial representatives of financial sectors as well, because Payment Service Directive allows Europe brings Europe to the fact that there are huge increase of such payment service providers as well as electronic money providers. However, the ability of enforcement side, combating sides to really to trace what's there and to understand how the money has been moved and who is behind those electronic money institutions and payment service institutions. Moreover, right now, when very many of them after Brexiting are moving back to Europe, to continental Europe, this is something where the balance between, again, facilitating some new channels of financial services and ability of everybody to understand the true risks that behind that, this should be really to be balanced. What regards virtual currencies and traceability of them, I think that right now in a COVID era, we see that this becomes a huge threat to all of us as a society. And we see that because of increased levels of cyber fraud, because of very many activities of criminals, that basically we are not right now really able to fight that activity of those criminals that are using different type of new fintechs, of new technology-based mechanisms, means. This becomes more and more frightening, I would say, feature of our financial crime. What is also important here is to say that those organized crime groups that are behind of very many activities that relates to the use of virtual currencies and means how to really to hide stolen monies, those organized crime groups are not in Europe. Most of them are situated or reside or are organizing themselves and organize those criminal activities outside the borders of the European Union. And then we come to another point, which is, to my understanding, somehow not being seen as very important, but is the most worrying sign of everything, is international cooperation. So what is done by Europe, what is done by our authorities to really understand and acknowledge that there are some of very soft attitude towards non-cooperative or selectively cooperating jurisdictions that have sometimes received quite a nice ratings under FATF mutual evaluation reports. But in fact, we cannot get true international cooperation from them. We cannot exchange information. We cannot get those criminals to be extradited to the countries that are facing those crimes. And this is something that I would draw to attention of European Commission. We need to have joint action. We need to address that issue, and we need to really fight inability of our countries to cooperate on international scale. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, and I'm going to come back to that because there are some really good points in there. I just would like to remind the audience that we are taking questions through the Slido mechanism, and we'll happily interpose them as and when, and have indeed done so. I think, Andrea, that might be the wrong slide, but we'll come back to that in a moment. So please do put your questions in. Yes, now this is it. So we've got the reference there, which is https://www.sli.do/ and then the meeting code is #AML. Brilliant. And I've got Steve, your hand is up, so I will come to you. I was just going to come back to you. Before I do come to you, I'd like to sort of add something to what Ilze said, which was talking about the international cooperation and those jurisdictions outside Europe. And there was some discussion in the AML action plan about that, but actually, how do we ensure that our perimeters are not effectively importing economic crime to us, or effectively allowing, sort of flowing it through Europe? And I think that sort of goes in with the international cooperation. We can only go so far, and how do we go that extra step? So I'll come to you on that one, Steve, if I may.
Thank you. I actually raised my hand originally to make a point about technology and payments, because I think this is one of the debates that we have internally within the Commission. One of them we already touched on is the debate GDPR versus AML. Another one that we have very often within the Commission is AML versus innovation. And here we have, for example, new means of payment, including, for example, instant payments. And that raises the issue: how meaningful is the power of the FIU to suspend transactions in the context of an instant payment? But if we go to one extreme, we could really dampen down technology innovation, which is very useful to consumers. So there's a constant debate going on there, and we need to try to get the balance right. And whether we have or not is a matter for judgment. On the third country issue, I mean, I think that there are two angles here. One is the multilateral angle, where we are active members of the FATF, taking part in various evaluations, also in Moneyval, etc. And so, I mean, we regularly kind of rub shoulders, of course, only virtually nowadays, with colleagues from around the world, both from the major jurisdictions and from the smaller ones. So there's the multilateral context there, but we also have very many bilateral dialogues, which are perhaps not publicly visible, but we do have bilateral dialogues, not only with major partners like the USA, but also obviously when we have a certain number of jurisdictions around the world which are, for example, listed by the EU, but not by the FATF, or they have been delisted by the FATF, and the EU has a number of extra benchmarks, extra hoops for them to jump through. So we are always in very, very intensive dialogue with those jurisdictions. I think part of the issue is certain jurisdictions which are perhaps, they don't have enough flaws to qualify for listing, but there are still some cooperation issues, and I think there is perhaps an area where we could up our game and maybe develop some more dialogue, because at the moment we tend to, given limited resources, focus on dialogues with those who are actually listed to help them get delisted. But I mean, you can't have a dialogue with everybody, but it's a point that I do take very well.
Thank you. I mean, Roger, do you have any comments in relation to this? Because, I mean, particularly banks where they go entirely across, most of them are cross-border institutions, and so therefore, it's you can maybe keep people out of one jurisdiction, but if the rules are lax somewhere else, and we've seen some examples of that, of weaker parts of the ecosystem globally being exploited by criminals. Whether there's anything you think that a package could introduce to assist in that, or whether the legislation could be changed to assist in that?
Well, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I think there are already a number of regulations in place for all the payments, and indeed they have to be updated to the new methods of payment. And I think the question of cryptocurrencies is absolutely key. In that field, well, I see that from two perspectives: the efficiency of the fight against money laundering. Also, it's also a question of level playing field. So when we compare the obligations on some traditional financial institutions and newcomers, they need to be subjected to the same rules. So that's the motto: same services, same risks, same rules. I think it's a very general comment, but I think in this field it's also very important to be conscious that there are many initiatives for the moment. You have the EU digital economy strategy, including the MiCA, the regulation on markets in cryptocurrencies. The FATF has been working very hard on that, and you also see in the tax field that now the common reporting standard is in the process of being reviewed with, as a first objective, to extend the scope of exchange of information and tax reporting to first to e-money products, but in the near future to cryptocurrencies, crypto assets. I think it's extremely important because we have been facing all these divergences in interpretation and implementation of regulations and FATF recommendations and so on. It's extremely important to maintain consistency. I think it's absolutely key, and it's already the case at a very simple level, which is the definitional framework.
Thank you. Actually, we've got another question that's just come in around that, which was, when does the Commission plan to update its list of high-risk third countries? I thought there was actually a rolling discussion about that, but Steve, you'll be able to tell me if I'm correct on that. And is there a particular geographical focus, or is it more focused on the particular deficiencies in a country?
Thank you. So, in fact, there is actually a FATF plenary coming up next week, and there will be, no doubt, as there always is, a couple of jurisdictions to be listed and maybe one or two to be delisted. And so we'll wait to see what happens at next week's plenary. But of course, our normal practice is to rather mechanically follow the FATF decisions in that area, and of course with the clarification that we list third countries, not member states, and normally not candidate countries, because we find that with candidate countries the accession process is a more useful tool to exercise pressure than actually the listing process. But with those provisos, we do tend to mechanically follow the FATF, but we will see what happens in the plenary. I do have in my head the jurisdictions which are likely to be listed, but best not to name names because because it's not certain until it happens.
Yeah, no, of course not. No, that's quite useful. I mean, I must admit that it is quite a useful tool to have, this list of high-risk third countries. So I think it's been, particularly with the provisions around it, has been quite helpful as a starting point for a lot of smaller businesses in considering jurisdictional risk. And I mean very small businesses, not the larger ones who can do their own analysis. There's one question that I want to come back to that somebody raised, which was to do with, and I think you mentioned, Steve, in your initial presentation that you were looking at this area as part of the work, which was the challenge that people have already in getting access to national registers of ultimate beneficial owners, so the national corporate beneficial owner registers. What are you able to give us any more detail as to what you might do? Because even if you can't have some sort of cross community register, I think actually there are quite a lot of barriers still in different territories in actually getting access to the information, whether that's registration requirements, whether it's the type of information that you have, whether it's the reasons that you have to give to get it. And I just wondered, sorry for bringing you straight back in again, whether you had any comments on that.
Thank you, Angela. Well, I mean, first of all, first point to make that this is nothing to do with our new legislative package. This is already there. That's under the current legislation, and it's just making sure that the legislation is properly rolled out and implemented. Now, of course, in the legislative negotiations on the last version of MLD5, it was decided by the legislators that for the general public, there can be a fee for access to the BO register, so it doesn't have to be free. And of course, it's to a smaller category of information. Now, I mean, the phase that we are at right now with the various member states, we're actually really focusing for the moment on making sure that the registers are fully populated with data, because they have to be up and running, and not only up and running, but they have to be filled with the full set of data that they should be filled with. But we are also looking at the access, and in fact, there was recently a report by Transparency International on the access issue. There are 1 or 2 member states where, in reality, it's quite hard to get access if you are not actually in that member state, and that's something that we have to look at. That could potentially be actually an infringement. But indeed, the legislation is what it is in terms of having the possibility of a fee and having the possibility to require justification of access. So we can't kind of go even if some of those things were not in the Commission's original proposal, they are there in the legislation. So, but we are working on enforcement, making sure that the registers are fully populated with the data that should be in there, putting the cross-border interconnection in place, and if there are any actual infringements in terms of access, we will deal with those.
Yeah, because I think one of the key things is not just the general public. It actually can be quite challenging for obliged entities. So it's quite useful, I think, in that respect. Particularly, as you mentioned, there are some jurisdictions where it's very difficult if you're an obliged entity from another country to actually get access. So I think any improvements there, certainly from our sector's perspective, would be quite helpful. Roger, I think you've got your hand up, so I will let you come in.
Yes. Well, I would like to emphasize the point of UBO registers. Indeed, extremely important for financial institutions, obliged entities. I must say that from the outset we have not been fan of the way UBO registers have been designed, and we really think as EBF that we need concrete solutions for the UBO registers, which should ensure the reliability and the quality of the UBO data. Extremely important. Someone should review the relevance of the data. And for us, the discrepancy reporting, which is required from FIs, from financial institutions, is not satisfactory. It first is administratively burdensome, but it's not the right approach. There should be a public authority in charge of that. Secondly, the way they have been designed is that they have been developed at national level. Now, I don't know what's the status of the work of the Commission on interconnectivity and interoperability, but the cross-border dimension is absolutely key. So I have always, and it's a personal remark, I have always been very surprised that this problem has not been designed at a higher level, at a cross-border international level, be it at European level, with a really centralized, say, European UBO registers or global UBO registers. That could have been a private initiative, and also again, I'm channeling with the tax field. You may know that there is a concept which is very similar to the beneficial owners under AML, which is the concept of controlling person of a non-financial entity under the Common Reporting Standard. It's again a question that I have always raised to myself. Why isn't there a synergy between those two fields, where financial institutions are requested to look more or less, and when I say more or less, it's really similar, more or less to the same data, and have to follow different procedures. So a lot of questions, and there may be some very simple answers, and regrettably, we are still working on this interconnectivity and interoperability. Now, maybe we can be optimistic, but again, I don't know the status of this work.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would probably, as a sector, I think, certainly as somebody who has to go through the test of actually trying to work out who the ultimate beneficial owner is in a number of jurisdictions where where legal framework, legal structures change, I certainly accept how challenging it is. I don't know whether, Steve, you want to come back in on there, or or there's I think you covered it saying that it's something you're looking at, but I don't know if you want to address any of the comments that.
Well, just on the cross-border interconnection between national registers, I mean, we are kind of really racing against the clock to get that up and running. It's a kind of IT project, not a legal project, but we really hope to get the cross-border interconnection operational this year. I think I would just leave it at that. So.
Okay, no, thank you. I mean, I think the next challenge, once we have inter-border connectivity and we also have information highlighted, is to actually make sure that the information is accurate and is kept up to date. And I mean, there are reporting requirements, but I don't know if anyone's got any comments on that. I don't know, Ilze, is that something that ever hits your radar as to whether the information on the registers is actually accurate, or whether people are hiding behind someone else?
Sure. It is something that we are obviously are facing all the time, and there should be more importance placed to the checks and of the registers, of the information that is contained in those registers. It is also important that it was not always the kind of like particular emphasis has not been put on the fact that how easy and basically without proper punishment for that or penalizing for that activity, it is to change beneficial ownership of and not being really punished for this. I come back to some issues when during the investigation side and where investigation phase of one or another money laundering offense. there has been a change of ownership and beneficial ownership, although from the fact we know that nothing has changed, just a theoretical and kind of like formal write-up in a register. So the question is it really so that we should not really analyze how to improve the system of, again, enforcing true and valuable information that is contained in those registers? For FIUs, it is again very important issue, and not only for FIUs but also for all other law enforcement. There's a lot of talk on financial sector and also other obliged entities side, how accessible is that information. But we should understand and acknowledge that it is also not so accessible for very many public sector authorities to get that information. So this comes to the position that we are still lagging a lot behind the true beneficial ownership information. And this was described very well by Transparency International very recently when they published their report, which basically informed us that there are only 2 countries in Europe being colored in green, which means that there is a free and quite reliable information in beneficial ownership registers, being Denmark and Latvia. And there are a lot to do in all other countries.
Which is an interesting point. Well, I'm conscious that we're coming towards the end of this. And so what I'm going to do now is there's one more question that I'd like to ask, which is sort of around, how we can actually build this effective ecosystem, AML ecosystem. So I wouldn't mind if I'd like all of you to have the time to make some closing remarks, but I'd really quite like if you might also consider this one, which is, how can supervisors, policymakers, and obliged entities ensure that there is, what practical steps can we all take to make sure that there's better cooperation, both at member state level and across the whole of the community, and also to try and build those public and private sector links. So as you're up there on the screen, Ilze, I'll start with you. And if you would like to make any closing remarks as well at the same time. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for asking this. I'm quite a practical woman, if I may say so. I believe in learning by doing. So I think that this should just start. It is it hurts myself when I hear a lot of theoretical speeches and intentions how to improve system. And sorry, Stephen, for maybe a bit focusing right now on EU or European Commission, because I really waited for that plan to be announced today and that we would be able to see that. However, what I can say from the perspective of institution that I'm leading, FIU Latvia, 2 years ago, we started very, very important initiative, which was never seen before, which is called IFIT, International Financial Intelligence Task Force. We organized that particular platform or mechanism for cooperation, collaboration, and exchange of information between 25 countries that were most impacted by one of the banks that collapsed in Latvia, ABLV Bank, which most probably is very well known for very many here. We invited 25 countries that whether sent to ABLV money or received from ABLV money. And right now, during those 2 years, it really is evidence of how important it is, such a cooperation. What is the result of it? There is a huge amounts already at this stage identified, potentially tainted funds. A lot of information disseminated to law enforcement, supervisory activities and penalties to some financial institutions that were willfully blind or some other reasons behind their activities. And I believe that this, what it requires from us, it required just courage to invite all of them, by means of artificial intelligence, to understand whom should be invited. And right now, to organize just twice a year such meetings. It is just, let's start doing, don't wait for this. And as a final note, I truly believe that not only international collaboration and also domestic one is important, but also, of course, awareness raising activities and training for all sectors that sometimes have been forgotten, including DNFBPs, including gatekeepers, which I'm personally, as I'm coming from law society, and I was a lawyer for 20 years, I believe that it is very important to really to focus on those who can protect us, prevent us from criminals by learning them, by informing them. For this reason, I will come to the experience that we have in Latvia. We are right now, we hope that European Commission will support our initiative of AML Innovation Hub, or AMLIH, how we call it, which would allow us not only to provide a platform for research of AML matters, but also for training possibilities and as well as a secure platform for exchange of information. Such type of new initiatives are needed all throughout Europe, and I really encourage everybody who is listening right now to go and ask from your governments to do something similar. So from that, I think that this would allow us to really to improve and build effective AML system.
Thank you. And I would particularly emphasize the point, I mean, having been part of a public-private partnership in the UK for some years, I think one of the key things is that while the risk of the gatekeepers, the professional services and the other DFNBPs is recognised, often their voices can be drowned out by the greater number of financial institutions who are around the table. So I think having some ability to actually have either a twin track with leading with collaboration at higher levels might be worthwhile to ensure that actually all sectors understand their risks. Their risks are understood also by both supervisors and indeed law enforcement, so that actually the collaboration can work more effectively. And I really like your suggestion about sort of just starting somewhere and moving on. I'm going to move on to Roger, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to give you no more than 3 minutes to make your closing remarks.
Thank you. I didn't get it. How long?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay. So what are the key points for me? I think I fully agree that we need to raise awareness. Money laundering is not just white-collar crime. It's about terrorist financing. It's about organized crime gang, which are involved in human trafficking and things like that. That's very important to understand that. We need to streamline the due diligence. That's notably a true implementation of the risk-based approach. Very important. I had not the opportunity to develop that. Very important point. We need to move from the tick the box approach to an intelligence-led approach. Build trust. Extremely important to build trust. The public sector and the private sector must absolutely in the future work hand in hand, and we have to exploit new technologies and the data science to reduce this haystack. So we are very much at a turning point, and we need to get it right.
Wow. Well, that was actually only 1.5 minutes. So that in any event, thank you very much for that. And actually, I think you probably summed up for us pretty much a number of the points that we made in our in the Accountancy Europe paper. So I'll now hand over to you, Steve, for closing remarks on your part. You've now got 4 minutes.
Well, I don't think I'm going to need anything like 4 minutes. So I just have really three basic points to make. The first is about the legislative framework. And I really hope that in a couple of years' time, we'll be in a situation where we have a stable legislative framework, which is robust and which will be there for some considerable time, because we have been in recent years been losing a lot of time and energy in frequent periodic changes to the legislative framework. So I really hope we will have a stable framework which will allow the resources to be focused on enforcement. That's my first point. My second point is about infrastructure for cooperation. Cooperation requires infrastructure, good infrastructure, and we're doing quite a lot of work on the infrastructure side. It's perhaps not so sexy, but I mean, we've already mentioned the interconnection between the BO registers. I mean, another thing that's taking up a lot of my time at the moment, we are actually, the Commission is taking over from Europol the management of this FIU.net communication network, and it's going to be quite upgraded. But in a few years' time, we'll hand it over to the new authority to be the host, with perhaps some harmonized formats and templates for communication. So having the infrastructure in place is very important. But I think the key thing, which you cannot create with legislation or with the infrastructure, is the culture, and the culture for international cooperation is something that you really have to build on and work on. And this is something that I mean, I have been noticing recently. I've been participating in a lot of meetings of FIUs, FIU platform, etc. And this is something that I really observe, is that the cooperation culture is something that has to be grown over time, you know, like a plant, if you like that metaphor. And that's something that you cannot create with legislation, and it's something that you cannot create by putting, you know, infrastructure, communications networks in place. It's something that has to be built on, and I very much hope that soon we're going to go back to having face-to-face, in-person meetings, because that's a very important factor for promoting the communication culture. It's not so effective virtually, so I really hope we're going to go back to that soon, to promote really building this a cooperation culture. I think those were my three key summing up remarks. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, it remains for me just to thank everybody, but I think there's a few comments that I'd make, and I think most of them have been made. I think building up trust is absolutely essential. I mean, if we are actually going to effectively bring the fight against criminals, then those who are engaged in their various roles in trying to either act as gatekeepers or fighting against it need to actually develop that level of trust. And I very much second your comments about being in person, because I think that really does help to build an understanding of where people are coming from in a way that a virtual discussion never can be. It never can do. I think that effectiveness is really important. For a long time it has been, and I think Roger's mentioned the tick the box approach to it, which is a compliance culture, and nobody underestimates the importance of compliance. In order to gatekeep, you need to have the information and you need to make sure that you have complied. But I think it is now, in order to get it to build effective results, is to try and bring some of this towards the criminal, some of the heat towards the criminal. And I think listening to Ilze and some of the things that have come out of Latvia, there's obviously quite a few models that could be looked at there, which I think is really interesting to hear. And I think that also with that, the level of trust that must have been built up, you know, is quite interesting, and it would be really useful to understand more about that at some point in the future. So, Roger, as ever, I will thank you for your contributions, because your knowledge of how the banking sector and how this whole thing works interactively is always unparalleled, and it's always a pleasure listening to what you have to say, because it's always so informative. So I'd like to thank the panel. I'd like to thank the organisers from Accountancy Europe, who've been behind the scenes sending messages and making sure that we're not all on mute at one stage or another. And I'd also like to thank the audience for their contributions. And with that, I will call the event to a close. Thank you. Thank you all.